Hello, and welcome to ISI Insiders, the flagship podcast of asking, do you really know how the internet works? Really? So that's a relevant question for today's podcast guest, as we'll soon learn. Now, in ISI Insiders, we get a chance to go inside of ISI, the famed and now 50-year-old Information Sciences Institute, to meet some ISI insiders. These are folks from across the Institute, and I do this to better understand their what, their how, and their why. That is, what they're doing, how they came to be doing it, and why. With their ability to essentially go anywhere else, tackle any other hard problem, why are they doing that here, right now? And why might you, dear listener, care? Hi, I'm Adam Russell. I'm the director of the AI division at University of Southern California's Information Sciences Institute, or ISI, and I'm your podcast host. I'm serving as your virtual guide as we talk to some ISI insiders, all to test my hypothesis that by better understanding this, by better humanizing the people who are doing the actual work that we hear about in the media or that appear as names on publications or conference talks, we might get a better sense of where things may be headed, or at least where these folks think we might be headed, as where as they think we should go, and how we might get there. So my guest today is Wes Hardaker. He's a senior computer scientist at USC's Information Sciences Institute, where, among other things, he is principally responsible for, and I'm quoting here, Wes, the operation and management of the internet's brootservers.net DNS critical infrastructure, which handles 1/13 of all the world's top-level DNS requests. Now, we're going to unpack that as we go forward. I hope you can unpack that, as well as some other acronyms that appear in your bio: DNS, RSAC, GOSSI, DINR, IAB, DDIDD. I pronounce that as did. But of course, I'm most excited about finally figuring out what LMAO means and whether or not it's pronounced GIF or GIF. I'm clearly turning to the expert there. We may spark some internet's worth of controversy in this process, but hey, we're brave souls here at ISI. Wes, thanks for coming on side.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, I hope you continue to feel that way. In fact, that intro with a lot of acronyms leads me to then ask one of many unfair questions that will be coming your way today, which is, I want to go back in time and hear you explain to your somewhere between 12 and 15-year-old self, what is it you're doing here, why you're doing it, and then we can talk about whether or not your 12 to 15-year-old self would be surprised.
So I'm going to turn your question around instead, and I'm going to tell you what happens when people ask my mother that question.
Okay, I like this. All right, we'll go
because she has come up with a better answer than I could have given my 5-year-old self. Right?
Okay.
Her friends say, "What does your son do?" And she says, "Do you use the internet?" And they say, "Yes." And she says, "Thank him."
He does the internet. He's internet. Yeah. Okay.
So I think for, I don't know, 25 or 30 years, I've lost track, been constantly involved in the interoperability of the internet, what makes things be able to talk to each other, even though that they're produced by different vendors, by different pieces of software. The fact that you can have 3 or 4 different web browsers that all can talk to many different varieties of web servers. In the same way that you don't think about it today when, you get in your car and you have to go fill up at a gas station. The fact that your car takes gas, and there is many different cars and many different types of gas from different types of gas stations, they all work. They all interoperate. The EV world is getting a little bit more complex because, there was some startup. A lot of times when things start, it's not that way. It's not until something becomes incredibly popular that everybody agrees, maybe we should have a standardized way of doing that, right?
Yeah.
So the internet works in the same way. There's a standard way that when you talk to a web server, this is how you ask for what you want, and this is the type of data that you're going to get back. And we have to agree on that or it won't work.
So how is it that you/ISI have come to be master of 1/13 of the world's like sort of internet traffic in some sense?
So that gets us into what is the DNS, and that is one small piece of how the internet works, right? It's the naming system. So the naming system is names like you and I are used to, like example.com or www.isi.edu. That top-level name is referred to within the domain name system so that you know where to go. And it's the same thing as like a phone book, for those of us old enough to have seen a phone book. You look up the person that you want to find and the phone number's next to it, and that's what you actually call. The DNS is the same way. You look up a name and out comes an IP address, not a phone number, and that tells you how to get to the actual place that you want to go and where the web server is that you want to talk to. So what most people don't realize is a couple of things. One, the DNS was created at ISI.
Hmm.
Paul Macapetras and John Postel founded the DNS many, many, many years ago. And the reality is that the entire internet ecosystem that everybody uses today would simply not work had ISI not done that. You and I use names and email addresses, adam@isi.edu or whatever your email address might be. My own, I have a gazillion email addresses, it seems like. Websites, everything like that, we refer to names. We can't memorize numbers. It's the same reason that phone books exist, and your phone now has a catalog of names. You rarely remember people's actual numbers. So the DNS is the same way. If it didn't exist, could you think that the existing internet would be as usable by end users today? By, the average person that really doesn't understand how computers work, let alone how the internet works? They would have no common way to refer to each other of, hey, I saw something cool on the internet, go here. That here depends on a name.
Yeah, yeah, right. Go talk to Jim. You think about sort of all the fighting that occurs on the internet, and yet that's all made possible by all this cooperation that's occurring essentially underneath it. I just want to reflect on the irony a little bit, that we're coordinating and cooperating so we can sort of argue over cat videos to some degree. I still don't want to leave your sort of 12 to 15-year-old self yet, because I'm curious if you explain this, if you had your mother go back in time and explain like what grown-up Wes is doing, would younger Wes think like, well, that makes sense to me, or would younger Wes be like, what the heck? Like, how did that happen? I mean, were you always sort of interested in this area, and so you sort of had some sense of like, this is my calling, or have you just like answered the call literally?
Well, if you ask my eighth grade old self, because I still have that journal,
Okay,
I actually said that I wanted to write computer games. So I wanted to be a programmer from the very early days. I started programming in third grade, I think.
that's awesome.
Loved it. Just couldn't get enough. And I'm still addicted today, right? Being able to make something do anything you want is just crazy. But my eighth grade self really wanted to make games. And the interesting thing is I actually started making a game on a plane about 3 weeks ago to teach people how the DNS worked. So
Oh,
the worlds have collided, right?
yes, yes. No, I'm such a believer in like games being able to sort of reveal that sort of stuff.
They're a great educational tool. So.
What have you sort of discovered is, and this is my term, not yours, so apologies. What would be your sort of superpower? Like when you come to a new team or a new place, like what do you, in addition to like insane, technical competence, what else have you found you're able to bring to a team that you think adds real value?
Well, that is so I think one of the things that I've always done in my entire career is make difficult things more usable. So all of the software that I've ever written has never been just to prove something works, right?
Hmm.
I don't like writing an academic paper just to have it sit on a shelf. If it's not turned into reality and becomes a useful artifact of the internet or anything else, then what's it really doing? So everything I have done tries to make hard techniques and hard concepts turn into something that is actually used. So going back to the SNMP era, I took in UC Davis, I took a previous open source package and tried to turn it around and make it usable. That has, through many decades, morphed into a product called NetSNMP. It's an open source package. Again, only network management's, people know that it exists, network operators in particular. It is now installed on pretty much, or available on every operating system but Windows. And we distribute a Windows binary, but it doesn't come with Windows. You can install it with your Mac. You can install it on anything. And it's just become that powerful, not because it's the best, it's because it's probably the most useful. That's what's
Hmm.
made I made it easy to use as much as I could, even though it's a really complex kind of protocol. To ignore the word simple in the name, that's a lie.
Yeah, that's right. That's just branding.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's important. The idea that like just doing cool stuff for the sake of coolness is that's not what we're really about at ISI. What in sort of the last 10 or 15 years, what has surprised you the most in terms of the research you've done and the the work you've had your hands in, where you thought like I expect this will go one way, but it went a totally different way.
I think most of the things that surprise me are stuff that just kind of comes out of left field. It's like anytime that the entire industry has taken a hard right turn, starting with the dot-com era in 2000 and whatever.
Hmm.
I went the IETF conference I've been to for 25, 30 years. And at the height of the dot-com era, we suddenly hit 3,000 people attending this conference. Where
Hmm.
the hallways were overflowed. I literally walked outside of the buildings to go to my next meeting room because the hallway was too full of people. Because the internet completely took over the world at that point, and there was a lot of venture capitalist spending. The current AI, shift in the last year or two has also done the same thing. It's like, where do we go now?
Yeah.
And we get to this point where nobody's quite sure. Nobody's quite sure what the next step is going to be. All everybody knows is that we have to spend all of our energy on it because we've got to figure out where the next step is. And I think we're there again.
That's my intuition. It certainly feels that way for someone who has the unenviable and probably impossible job of setting strategy for an AI division in the current landscape. Uh, if you, given that level of uncertainty, we don't really know what's coming, and you could have dinner with anyone from history, live or dead, and we'll bring him back to life for you, so you don't have to sit at the table with a corpse. Who would you want to have dinner with in order to talk a little bit more about like how do we think about this uncertainty or where we are right now?
Can I give you two answers?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll pick one alive and one no longer alive. First off, Isaac Newton, probably,
Mm,
because we have changed the way that we think so much because we get instant communication. When I have a problem with my AI, algorithm, I'm going to write you and you're going to write back in 5 minutes, right? That's not what happened in the days of Newton and everything else, right? He had to invent calculus because he had a problem. He wasn't able to write somebody else and ask. And if you do get to that stuck point back then,
mm.
you have to know you're really stuck because it's going to take a month round trip for the horse to carry your letter off to the other side, hope it gets answered, and then come back, right? There's no Stack Overflow to give you an answer in 5 seconds that you can copy and paste. And so, if you were writing somebody, it was a last resort, not what we do today, which is really the first resort, right? I don't know where to start. I'm going to go to Stack Overflow or something. Today, though, I think I've always wanted to meet Neil deGrasse Tyson. The
Mm.
guy just blows my mind in his ability to do everything that I've talked about. How to take a concept and convey it to somebody that's outside the field in a way that they understand, in an intuitive way, in a fascinating way, and in an educational way, right? That's half of my goal a lot of the time is figuring out how to do that knowledge transfer to people that don't necessarily know anything.
Yeah, no, and equip them to be able to at least think about it in a way. For the record, I think you're doing a great job. So I think Neil deGrasse Tyson would be lucky to have dinner with you too. Uh, since you are interested in communication more generally, both structurally but also the substance, and my understanding is this is the first podcast you've been on. I'm curious if you had a podcast series, what would that podcast be about?
I've always been tempted to make a podcast about just describing to people how each protocol within the internet works. And everybody thinks, oh, well, it's just HTTP. And if you ask the average person, it's like, well, I was using my computer. And then what they really mean is I was using my web browser. And when they're writing mail, they're even doing it through the web browser. And nobody has any idea how many protocols are invisible underneath that, and that are actually quite fascinating in how they work as well. So I would love to do a podcast about how the internet actually works, not designed toward people that need the education, but just those who need interest or have a greater curiosity of like, what is this magnificent thing that we've created and what are all the nuts and bolts that make it work?
Yeah, aside from again admiration for what's possible, both from our species and then cooperation, why do you think it's important for people to understand that?
I think it's important for people to understand how the world works in general. I think that information transfer to everybody so that everybody has a better understanding means we'll improve the world at large. People will have new ideas. People that don't know a topic have the best possibility of thinking outside the box.
What are some of the sources you use to sort of keep up with, technology developments?
Oh,
We're all lost, admittedly, but how do you become
you
less
know, the
lost?
problem is that everything shifts according to what I need to do at the time, and I am a absolute lifelong learner, as I think many people in our field are. So I shift around all the time. I mean, Wikipedia articles are great. Brilliant is a fantastic, application for learning new things. Stack Overflow is, of course, fantastic. I'm constantly reading books. I'm constantly reading tutorials. I'm constantly, going through anything I can. In one of the tools that I use all the time is called Habitica, which is just a to-do list, tracking thing, and it has this role-playing element to it too. But it has this concept of your daily things that you should do. And one of my daily things is learn something new. It's literally what it says. It's the very top one, because I don't want to go a day without learning something new.
Man, I like that. One of the challenges, though, I mean, everybody says like, "Oh, I'm a learner," and I have no evidence that you're not. But one of the challenges to learning that I've discovered, at least in my own personal life, but with others as well, is that also means having to acknowledge when you're wrong. And experts really struggle sometimes with acknowledging that they're wrong. Some do or don't. Maybe it's an unfair characterization, but where have you been most wrong?
Everywhere.
Okay, all right.
I am more than willing to admit when I'm wrong. I mean, the first thing you should
Mm,
do, and that's the whole nature of science as a whole, right? Is this is the best of our knowledge now. I do not believe that there's anything that contradicts the statements that I'm making today or the conclusions I've come to. Somebody's bound to come along, a year or two from now and prove that there was a better way or there's a new way to do it. So I have no issues admitting that I was wrong. And I do it all the time. In fact, I think that's actually one of the best qualities you can have as a leader in general.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Still have some sense of where you want to go, but being willing to update how you might get there and what's going to get you there. If you could, in fact, take some time off to develop, let's say, a mega scale kind of game, what what would that game be about?
I'm actually tinkering. Interesting. We're really coming full circle today. I actually am tinkering right now in my spare time. I have another machine next to me that's not my work machine that I'm actually developing a game on that's reproducing a game that I originally played on a Mac, I want to say 30 years ago, called Factory, where, the whole point is just conveyor belts and putting things together. But it's one of those, management kind of things where if you don't keep your eye on everything, you're gonna lose because you have to click the right button at the right time.
Why is that? Why is that interesting to you? Why?
It wakes your brain up. Any types of those games where you're really having to think quick, right? You're having to really, if you wake up in the morning and you need a cup of coffee and there isn't any coffee, you play a game like that
Mm,
and it
mm.
stresses you out enough, it'll finish waking you up, right?
Like, okay, or you can just be woken up by howling dogs and screaming children, as is wont at my house. I find it interesting though that because I mean games are back to this question of being wrong and being willing to update and being willing to try things and learn quickly. I mean games strike me as like a perfect avenue to learn that sort of thing, right? Because the whole point of a game is you're going to be wrong, you're going to try things. Seems to me like we need you to create the games and a podcast and build those teams that will make us better at that kind of thing. I think as a species. All right, well, Wes, I think we're coming to an end. Thank you for, in true sort of Wes Hardaker brand, being willing to sort of canvas and wander around and cover a lot of things. It's actually been a real pleasure, and this is one of the things I enjoy most about this podcast is getting a chance to talk to awesome people, but also really get a much deeper appreciation for what we do, how long we've been doing it, and how important it is that we do this. So, on behalf of, frankly, the species and the internet, like, thank you for what you do, and in particular your commitment to to lifelong learning and
Well,
building good
thanks for
teams.
having me here. Every conversation makes me learn something too. So I definitely enjoyed the past hour or whatever it's been, and I learned as well.
Hundo P, which apparently is not an expression I'm allowed to say because I'm over the age of 30 or something. But my wife tells me this, but I do it anyway because I learned what it meant. You also didn't answer my question about GIF or GIF, but I'm not going to force you to to wage in those battles. But do you have strong opinions?
I actually don't remember. I think I'm calling it GIF these days, but I remember early on going, I can't decide. I can't decide.
I feel the same way, which is why we embrace the uncertainty, and I'm prepared to go. I'm going to remain agile. All right. Well, Wes, thank you again for your time. Great to know what you're doing. Hope we'll get you back on here at some point as well to get an update. And in the meantime, I will stand by for Wes Hardaker games to be launched and look forward to it.
All right. Thanks very much.
All right. Well, if you enjoy these short podcasts, please do what really only you can do, or at least we only want you to do because you're listening. And so it's informative. Please rate us, score us, evaluate us, grade us, subscribe, spread the word, send us feedback, offer up brave questions. We'll take your jokes. But of course, mostly just keep listening and learning. And join us, please, for another episode of ISI Insiders, where we'll keep exploring, keep learning, and keep humanizing tech to help navigate our way through this weird world, trying to do what humans can do best when they face these kinds of challenges, working together as if all our lives depend on each other, because they do. So for now and for the future, fight on.